Emma had never been one to believe in the supernatural. As a young woman in her mid-20s, she had a pragmatic approach to life. She worked as a freelance writer, spending most of her time alone in her apartment, cranking out articles and short stories. When she inherited her late aunt's house, an old, creaky, Victorian-style place on the outskirts of town, she saw it as a fresh start, a place to escape the monotony of city life. The house had charm, a kind of haunted beauty, even if it seemed to have been frozen in time. The walls were lined with old, faded wallpaper, and the creaky floors groaned underfoot like a forgotten memory. It was exactly what she needed, a quiet retreat to write and think. One thing Emma noticed almost immediately upon moving in was the collection of strange, antique items scattered throughout the house. Old portraits hung crookedly on the walls, and dusty bookshelves sagged under the weight of old leather-bound volumes. Among the most curious of these objects was a single porcelain doll, sitting innocently on a small wooden shelf in the living room. It was delicate, with a pale face, large glass eyes that glinted in the light, and dark brown curls that framed its porcelain head. It was dressed in an old-fashioned white lace gown, looking very much like something out of a Victorian-era story. At first, Emma didn't think much of it. It was just another antique left behind by her aunt. But there was something odd about it, something that gave her an uncomfortable feeling whenever she passed by. Its eyes seemed to follow her around the room. She brushed it off as her imagination, a trick of the light, or perhaps the heavy atmosphere of the house. Days passed, and Emma fell into a routine of writing during the day and reading at night. But as the days wore on, the uneasy feeling lingered. She found herself glancing at the doll more frequently, unsure why it unsettled her so much. It wasn't particularly frightening, and it didn't do anything. But there was something undeniably off about it. Then came the first night it truly got to her. Emma had been working late into the night, typing away at her desk in the living room. The house was quiet, except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. It was around midnight when Emma got up to stretch her legs. She went to the kitchen, grabbed a glass of water, and when she returned to the living room, she froze. The doll, it had moved. Not by much, but enough to make her stomach churn. The doll, which had always been sitting straight on the shelf, was now leaning forward, its head slightly tilted, as though it was gazing directly at her. She tried to rationalize it. Perhaps the shelf had been unstable, or maybe the house had shifted a bit with the change in temperature. But something inside her told her that wasn't it. For the next few days, strange occurrences began to unfold. Objects in the living room seemed to move on their own. A book she had left on the coffee table was now across the room, as though someone had casually tossed it aside. Her keys disappeared for hours, only to turn up in places she knew she hadn't left them. But each time Emma entered the living room, her eyes were drawn to the doll, which remained motionless. Or at least, that's what she hoped. Then came the whispering. It was a soft, almost imperceptible sound at first, like a voice carried by the wind. Emma couldn't make out the words, but she could feel them. A presence in the room with her. She'd sit at her desk, trying to focus on her work, and feel as though someone was standing right behind her, watching her. The whispers became louder at night. Late into the hours, she'd wake up to a low murmur from the living room. She tried to ignore it, thinking maybe it was just the house settling, the wind rattling the windows. But deep down, she knew it wasn't the wind. One night, when Emma woke to the sound of faint whispering again, she couldn't take it anymore. She grabbed a flashlight, determined to find out where the noise was coming from. The house was cold, the air thick with a strange tension. She made her way to the living room and stopped dead in her tracks. The doll was gone. Her heart stopped. She looked around the room, panic creeping into her chest. It couldn't have walked off on its own. She knew she had left it on the shelf before going to bed. She searched frantically, under the couch, behind the curtains, in every corner. Nothing. And then, as though it was mocking her, she heard the unmistakable creak of the bedroom door. Slowly, she made her way down the hallway. Her breath caught in her throat. When she pushed open the bedroom door, she saw it. The doll, sitting perfectly on her bed. Its glassy eyes fixed on her, unmoving. Emma stumbled backward. She wanted to scream, but couldn't find her voice. She turned to run, but the doll's gaze seemed to hold her in place, as though it was locking her in a silent conversation. She slowly backed away, feeling as if she were trapped in some sort of nightmare. The next day, Emma contacted a local antiques dealer, hoping for an explanation. The dealer, a middle-aged man with graying hair, was immediately uneasy when he saw the doll. He explained that the doll was indeed an antique, but not just any antique. It had once belonged to a woman who was said to have a deep interest in the occult and believed that certain objects could hold the spirits of the dead. The dealer explained that there had been rumors surrounding the doll's origins. It was said to have been passed down through generations, each owner experiencing strange occurrences and unsettling feelings after bringing it into their home. Some said the doll had been cursed. Others said it was simply a conduit for restless spirits. Emma, terrified, knew she had to get rid of it. She packed the doll into a box and took it to a local thrift store, hoping to rid herself of the haunting presence it carried. But as she placed it on the shelf at the store, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt. What if it was still out there? What if someone else found it and became cursed like she had? Weeks passed, and Emma thought she had finally left the doll behind. But sometimes, late at night, she would hear that same whispering sound again. It would drift through her bedroom window, faint and distant, like the doll's unyielding presence, reminding her that no matter how far she ran, she would never escape its gaze. Some things, it seemed, were meant to follow us. So, the question remains, was it just a doll? Or was it something more? A vessel for something darker, something far beyond what Emma could ever have imagined? Perhaps we will never know. But one thing is certain, the doll that watched from the shelf was not just an object. It was something alive, waiting, watching, and never truly leaving. And sometimes, the things we leave behind, the things we try to forget, are the very things that never let us go. It was a rainy autumn evening when I first encountered the doll. The kind of night where the wind rattled the windows and the sky wept in sheets of gray. The air felt heavy, thick with anticipation, as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I had just moved into a small, forgotten town on the outskirts of nowhere. The kind of place where everyone knew your name, even if they hadn't met you yet. I wasn't used to the stillness. The silence of this town was deafening, and it seemed to creep into my bones. It was on my first visit to the local antique shop, the one I had passed several times without thinking much of it, that I found her. The shop was tucked away on a narrow street, almost hidden by the overgrown ivy and the sagging wood of the building. It seemed to have been standing there for centuries, forgotten by time, much like the objects it held inside. As soon as I entered, the musty smell of old leather and dust hit me. The shop was crammed with trinkets, glass bottles, tarnished silverware, and paintings that seemed to stare back at you. It was the type of place that made you feel like you were trespassing in a long-lost era. But what drew my eye wasn't the old furniture or the rusted clocks. It was the doll. She sat in a corner of the shop, her porcelain face perfectly smooth, her eyes a startling blue, locked in an eternal gaze that seemed to pierce through you. She was small, maybe a foot tall, dressed in a tattered lace gown, her dark brown hair tucked neatly under a bonnet. There was something almost too perfect about her, and yet something unsettling. The way her eyes glimmered in the dim light. I couldn't look away. The shopkeeper, an elderly woman with a deep voice and sharp eyes, noticed my interest and slowly made her way toward me. She seemed to know I would be drawn to the doll. "Ah, you've found her," she said softly, her voice like a whisper that carried weight. Not many people notice her, but once you do, it's hard to forget. I glanced at her, confusion crossing my face. "What do you mean?" "She's been here for a long time," the shopkeeper said. "No one ever keeps her. They try, but they always bring her back. Some say it's her eyes. Others say it's the way she moves." I wasn't sure if she was joking or if there was a strange air about the place, but I shrugged it off. The price was too good to pass up, and I was desperate for something to fill the empty space in my new house. As I walked home with the doll in hand, the wind seemed to grow stronger, and the trees began to sway wildly as though warning me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, but I told myself it was just the storm. I placed the doll on a shelf in the living room, trying to ignore the unease creeping up my spine. It wasn't long before strange things began to happen. At first, it was subtle. Objects in the house would be slightly out of place. A cup moved from one table to another. A book fell off the shelf for no reason. I dismissed it as me being tired, or maybe the house settling. But then the whispers started. It was a faint sound at first, almost like a soft hum. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't anything I could explain. The voice seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. It was low and soothing, but I could never make out the words. I assumed it was just my imagination. But then I began to feel something watching me. A presence. Something that wasn't there before. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I came home to find the doll had moved. She was no longer sitting perfectly still on her shelf. She had turned, facing the door, as though waiting for me. I chalked it up to the wind. Maybe the house wasn't as steady as I thought. Maybe the vibrations from the old wooden floors had caused her to shift. But that night, the whispers grew louder. They were unmistakable now, echoing through the empty halls. I sat up in bed, frozen in place, as the soft murmurs filled the room. It was as if they were speaking directly to me. "Come closer," the voice beckoned. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the feeling, trying to ignore it. But no matter what I did, I couldn't escape the sensation of the doll's eyes following me. It wasn't just my imagination. It felt real, too real. The next day, I decided to do some research on the doll. I had to know more. I needed to understand what was happening. I visited the library, digging through old records, local news clippings, and anything I could find about the shop and its cursed items. What I discovered was chilling. The doll was said to have been made over a century ago by a toy maker whose daughter had tragically passed away. In her grief, the toy maker crafted the doll to resemble his daughter, pouring his sorrow and love into its creation. It was said that after the doll was finished, the toy maker's life began to unravel. His health deteriorated rapidly, and he was found dead in his workshop, his eyes wide open, staring at the very doll he had made. The doll was sold at an estate auction shortly after, and it was passed from owner to owner, each one reporting strange occurrences before eventually returning it. It seemed that no one could keep her. No one could withstand her gaze. That night, I tried to get rid of the doll. I packed her up in a box, hoping that sending her back to the shop would end whatever curse had settled over me. But as soon as I tried to leave the house, I felt a strong force pulling me back. I couldn't move. The room seemed to close in on me, as though the walls themselves were pressing against me, urging me to return. And when I turned around, the doll was there, on the shelf, watching me. Her porcelain face, so cold and lifeless, now seemed to smile at me, as if she had won. As if she always knew she would. I tried to leave again. I tried everything. But every time, no matter how far I went, the doll would find its way back. It was as if it had a mind of its own. And worse, it seemed to be changing me. Little by little, I started to feel more and more like the doll. Cold, detached, a stranger in my own mind. Now, I'm trapped. I can't get rid of it. I can't escape her eyes. They're always watching me, even when I try to close my own. I've become her prisoner, and there's no way out. If you're ever in a small town, and you find a shop filled with antiques, and you spot a porcelain doll with dark, lifeless eyes, don't buy it. Walk away. Because once it's yours, it won't let you go.